This is the Michael Bryan Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show, and I am joined with Jeff Horowitz, who is a certified running, cycling and triathlon coach. He's done a lot of marathons, ultra marathons, and he's written 5 books, if not more, on endurance and running. So thanks so much for joining me, Jeff.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I appreciate it.
So how about we start with the question of why running? Like, why did you start it? Why should other people start it?
That's great. We were talking before the show started about your background, in martial arts and tennis and soccer. I guess I began running because I can't do all that stuff. They say that running is a refuge of people who have no other athletic skills, and maybe that's true. I started running because it was just the easiest thing for me to do to relieve stress. I was starting graduate school, I was in beginning in law school, and I just felt overwhelmed. And I literally began with a jog around the block just to blow off steam and just fell in love with it. And the first race I ever did was a marathon and fell in love with that. It's become such an important part of my life. It's something that seems so simple, doing something that we all learn how to do when we're, 2, 3 years old. That sounds so very simple, putting one foot in front of the other. It becomes something so meaningful in so many different ways in my life. And that's why I enjoy writing about it and sharing it with people.
Now, I know you said your first race was a marathon. I can't let you
Yeah.
not explain that. Most people start with a 5K. So why did you choose
Yes.
marathon for your first?
Yes, that would be like the normal thing to do. I needed a challenge that would keep me honest, that would force me to get out the door. I think a good challenge has to involve a certain amount of fear, right? That you need to set a goal for yourself that maybe you don't think you can reach, that you're very, very nervous about. And for me, doing a 5K, I knew I wasn't going to have any great speed. And I understand that everybody should run 5Ks if you're a runner, just to challenge yourself to a degree you can be challenged. And I do that now. But at the time I was thinking, I'm not going to win. I'm not going to be competitive. I'm just simply not that fast. And I know I could run a 5K distance. That's not going to put my feet to the fire and create that kind of fear and nervousness that's going to get me out of bed, at dawn in the morning to do my hard workouts. But the idea of a marathon, wow, that really captured my imagination because it was terrifying to me. I could not imagine, right? Even now, having done, I last month I did my 204th marathon. Even now, I kind of can't wrap my head around that. It's an impossible thing to do, but like the bumblebee is not supposed to be able to fly, but it does, right? We managed to do it. So for me, having that huge goal focused me so much on making sure I got the work done and I did all my training. It seemed the right path for me to be successful. And yeah, the history of it, the challenge of it, the beauty of it in a way, if you could look at it that way, that really was motivational. So I needed that kind of motivation for my first race.
There's a lot to be said actually for having a goal that's big enough to get you out of bed. You must have had quite a lot of self-awareness too to be able to understand that. Like if you set a 5K, well, that wouldn't really drag me out of bed, but a marathon would.
Yes, I didn't really think about self-awareness. I thought about it a lot since then. One of the nice things about running is that it gives you a lot of time to think. So if you tend to be kind of introspective, as I think I am, um, and focus on details, as I think I do, and the big picture, as I think I do, running is a great sport. So I think maybe I understood that instinctively at the time, but I've given a lot of thought since then about what does motivate me, what will get me excited and get me out there to do things, what kind of challenges really resonate for me. And yeah, that's what I discovered. That was the thing that got me going and still does all these years later.
Now I know that you're actually quite passionate about being able to run, but also about your life in a way. Like you can't afford to be injured, you need to listen to your body, that sort of thing. Talk to us a bit about what it's like to run long term, not just your ultra marathons, but sort of 5 years, 10 years and beyond. How
Yeah.
has running played a part in that?
Boy, it's that's so interesting. That's such a great question because if you want to keep up with something for, long term in your life, you have to figure out how to make it work, how to fit it in, how to keep it as a healthy part of your lifestyle. And the interesting thing with running, as with any sport, really, to get better at it, you have to do it. That's called specificity of movement, right? To become a better runner, you have to run. To become a better painter, you have to paint. But with running, with so much of sport, with so much of training, the problem lurking in that is if you only do one thing, you open yourself up to injury. And so many runners have the long list of injuries that they get: runner's knee, patella tendonitis, different hamstring issues, hip issues, back issues. And so much of that stems from that monoculture of just running. And I came into running actually from a background in sport that involved more strength training, cycling, different kind of things that I was doing. And so it was natural for me to keep up with that. I still loved all of that. But I learned that really what our bodies thrive with, how we've evolved, is to do lots of different kind of things. And if we only focus on one thing, we leave gaps in our fitness. And so a lot of what I've written, a lot of what I coach and teach is to make sure that you fill all these gaps. Really, if you're going to sum it up, is that your body loves diversity. It loves being challenged, but it loves being challenged in different ways, not just physically, but mentally. People think because I love to run, I always enjoy it. No, just like anybody else, there are days when I just don't really want to. I'm not thrilled by it. I'm not loving it. But to spend time then doing something else that's challenging and fulfilling and makes me healthier and fit will ease some of that mental strain of only doing that one thing over and over. I'm lucky enough here in the DC area where I live, Washington, DC, where we have these wonderful bike trails and routes in different communities, but I straddle them and I'm a little bit torn. So my cycling friends always pull me to do these long bike rides with them. And my running friends want me to come with them running and give up the cycling. And I try to make everybody happy by doing both. And I seem to thrive by having this variety of movements. I focus on loving. That's my first love, my true love. But yeah, I have lots of other interests that I try and pursue also. The cycling, the kayaking, strength training, all that kind of stuff.
I wonder if you can share a little bit about the crossover of that. But do you feel a difference in the running or the cycling when you do the strength training? I imagine it's hard to necessarily look at cause and effect with this. If we do so much, it can be hard to truly nail it down. But what's been your experience?
Actually, it's easier to nail down than you might think. There's a fair amount of research on this. The thing with running is that it's mostly back of your body movement. You talk about kinesiology, the study of body movement, that you drive off the power generated by your backside, your gluteus maximus muscles. Your hamstrings kick in as well. That's where your push off comes from. Everything else is kind of recovery as your leg swings up and you plant your foot for the next push off. So running is really not a smooth, even movement if you look at it that way. It's a series of staccato short movements where you push, 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 almost as if you were driving a car and you just kept tapping on the gas. That's what running really is. And so all those muscles in the back of your body have to be strong to do that. But that leaves a gap where the muscles in the front of your body are not as strong as maybe they should be in a supportive role. So, for example, runner's knee is extremely common. And that's a form of patella tendonitis or patellofemoral syndrome, where your kneecap is not held in place firmly by strong quadricep muscles of the front of your leg. And so it slides around and creates irritation and then inflammation underneath your kneecap. And that's a result of your quadriceps, again, those muscles on the front of your leg, not really getting stressed directly in running because it's a back of body movement. So that becomes a problem. That weakness becomes the issue for runners. Cycling is the exact opposite. You push down on the pedal and that stresses your quad, develops quad strength. So it's been shown in all these different studies how cycling will directly lead to better running efficiency and strength and lower risk of injury. So it's not just something I do because I love it, I enjoy it, it provides a mental break, but it makes me a better, more injury-resistant runner. I had written a book a couple of years ago called Quick Strength for Runners. Wow, a couple of years ago. Actually, I think 12 years ago now. It goes quick. But talking about how creating a strong core, cross-training is working different kinds of aerobic exercise, but doing other kinds of training as well, like strength training. If you do a kind of strength training which creates a strong core, that will help you maintain better body position as you run, keep the stress where it should be, won't stress muscles unduly and excessively, and thereby it will reduce the risk of injury by keeping everything strong in motion. So if you do strength training, Pilates, yoga, core work, whole range of different exercises, if you do cycling, other kinds of movement, you will actually create a more injury-resistant runner. Your risk of injury will go down. Your efficiency will go up. You'll find that you probably run better, you run faster, you feel better. And it's really a direct cause and effect. So you will see that pretty quickly. It's really interesting.
It makes me think actually that even people that are not so great at running, maybe it's their first time trying, that they could improve by adapting this more varied approach, not just going out and running all the time, but possibly doing different things alongside.
That's absolutely right. The interesting thing with new runners is that as you start running more and more, you will just naturally get faster and better. That you create different efficiencies as you get more fit. So without even trying, and I love saying this to new runners because it's so encouraging, without even trying, if you just keep running, you will get faster. But at some point, you will top out with that, and then you have to start thinking about what your program should really be like. So I spend as a coach, as an athlete, as a trainer, I spend a lot of time figuring out how to put together optimal programs, right? Keep in mind not just what's best for our bodies, but what's best for our whole lifestyle. I mean, most people can't spend 80% of their day working on becoming more fit. You know, we have jobs, we have families, we have things that we want to do, maybe tickets to the theater. But trying to figure out how to check off all these different boxes to make sure that we do all the things that will help our bodies thrive. So I think of it that way, like different boxes, like there's a strength training box I need to check off, stretching and flexibility box I need to check off, cardio training, running training, all these different kind of things. And I try and make sure that every week I manage to tap into all of that kind of training to make myself as healthy and injury resistant as I can. And if you're starting out as a runner, doing all those different things will just put you directly on the right path to be able to be, a long-term athlete. And that's what we aim for, to have a lifestyle that's sustainable, that will keep us happy and healthy for as long as we can, right?
Now, there is a lot of, let's just say, misinformation out there about running and how to get better at running, possibly improve your times and distances and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I wonder,
Yeah.
are there like a top three myths around running, and what is the actual answer to these?
Wow, yeah, that's really good. So in the US, and maybe this is true in the UK as well, I've been starting to think that we may have like a kind of toxic relationships with our bodies fostered by our culture. Because we have a culture that seems to say that you must have an adversarial relationship with your body. I think far and away that's the biggest myth. That you have to break through, that you just have to push harder. Pain is just weakness leaving the body. No pain, no gain. All these kind of things that somehow there's this idea that your body is your enemy and you have to dominate it, overcome it. And that couldn't be further than the truth. Your body loves you so much that's willing to hurt itself to make you happy, right? That if you ask your body to keep going, it will, even if you would end up getting injured by doing it. So you have to think of your body, I think, instead of being your enemy, something you have to overcome, something you have to push through, something that you have to ignore the signals from. Instead, think of it as being like your partner, like your spouse, right? So, as an example of this, I take some of the common like advertising and cultural phrases we use, like no pain, no gain. Pain is just weakness leaving the body, and put it in terms of like a relationship to see how ridiculous that sounds. Like just add in my marriage, right? So say, pain, no pain, no gain in my marriage. It's like, what? you know, Pain in my marriage is just weakness leaving my marriage. That doesn't make any sense. That sounds like grounds for divorce. That's ridiculous. So why would we treat our bodies this way when our bodies really are maybe our most important partner in our lives? So instead, I urge people to think about how they can work with their bodies to get the most from their bodies. And that really requires a lot of like biofeedback. I know that sometimes we feel lazy, we don't want to do something, we have to get out there and do it. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when your body's giving you real signals that, you might be overtraining or you might have an injury issue that's coming up. And so, Michael, we talked a little bit earlier before we went online about how one of my favorite phrases I share with everyone is, be smarter than you are brave. That's my overarching training philosophy. If I was going to point to one thing for everyone to keep in mind, that would be it. Be smarter than you are brave. Sometimes it's a better idea to not work out, to not do a given day's training when your body's telling you with all these warning signs that would be a bad idea. I know you're tough enough to do it, but the smarter thing would be to hold off, regroup, give your body what it needs. Maybe it's just a rest day and then get back at it. There have been days where I literally have gone out to run. I've gone just down the street, maybe 100 meters, and I thought, this feels totally wrong. I'm not going to do it today. Turn around, come back home, and almost invariably, I have a much better run the next day, right? And I'd rather have that one good run than two miserable runs. And it's all about being in touch with that and realizing that that myth that you just have to push yourself all the time can be really destructive and counterproductive.
Am I right in saying as well, Jeff, that it's in the recovery that we actually improve? Like you don't keep improving by keep doing the thing. It's the recovery that allows us to adapt and get stronger and fitter.
That's so true and so important to keep in mind because the whole training cycle involves introducing a training stimulus. That's your run, that's your weightlifting, that's your Pilates class, something to push your body just a little bit. And that stimulus will create an adaptation response. Your body will be a little stressed from it and release these growth hormones and restructure itself, and you'll then come out of this cycle being faster and stronger and more fit, depending on your training stimulus, right? But the big part of that, as you mentioned, Michael, is the recovery. If all you do is push, 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 and you never give your body that chance to adapt, then you're just going to cycle down into an injury. So having those easy days is important. And one thing that I work on a lot that's very difficult for me is recuperative sleep, right? Really productive sleep. Because when we sleep, we release human growth hormone, and that's when we do a lot of our healing. And so if you don't have good sleep, you're not going to recover from those hard workouts as well as you should, and you open up the door to injury. The most important thing to me is to reduce the risk of injury. If you can't get out there and train, then everything gets compromised. So avoiding that injury is one of the most important things. And one of the ways we do that is really make sure we do get that recovery. We get good sleep and develop good sleep habits as much as we can. We schedule easy days after hard days. Make sure we eat properly. Nutrition is a big part of recovery too, right? Giving your body the tools it needs to build, rebuild muscle and heal and do all those things to become better athletes. But recovery should be as much in the foremost of our minds as the training is.
What else do we usually get wrong then? So think of the things that we get wrong as runners, as people that are trying to keep active. What else do we get wrong?
I think that sometimes, and this is me talking as a coach, okay, there's a phrase out there you might have heard that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I love that because it tells me that our background, our experience, our interests usually color the way we interpret a given situation. So I'm a trainer and coach, so I look at form, right? If I was an orthopedist, maybe I'd look at joint health. If I was a chiropractor, I would look at body alignment. But to me, as a coach, I look at form. And to me, so much of that involves, core strength. So I think that people sometimes don't have an appreciation about how a lot of the other noise we hear about, shoes and equipment and smart technology, will make you a better runner when really I think what we need to focus on is make sure that our bodies are moving in the right movement patterns, that you're running correctly. I have the book that just came out is Think Like a Runner. I talk about in that book about how I think every runner at some point in their lives should get a gait analysis. They should have a trained expert. Usually these are physical therapists, physios, put you on a treadmill and watch what you're doing and see how your body moves and look for any anomalies that you can repair, that you can fix and work on. Sometimes it's a matter of just doing some stretching, strengthening certain muscles so you stay in proper alignment. You've got these good movement patterns. I talk about how I think at some point in all of their lives, every runner should work with a coach, try and maximize their form, try and create training patterns that will really lead them to success, training programs and plans. But there's a myth sometimes that it's all about the shoes, right? That was a tagline used by a running company years ago. It's all about the shoes. Shoes can make a difference, but in my opinion, so much of it is how you run and not what you're wearing and what smartwatch you have on your wrist and what smart clothing you have on. I have all that. I'm not saying don't. I enjoy that. But when it comes down to it, it's how you move, right? What's interesting to me, this is pointed out that in, some 30 years of billions of dollars being spent by running companies on exploring shoe technologies and coming out with different kinds of shoes. We've gone from having, maximal shoes, minimal shoes, all kinds of different trainers. The one really steady factor in all that, as all these types of shoes have changed from going barefoot running and all different kinds of things, is that the rate of injury has been pretty steady, right? At some point, I think it matters less what you wear on your feet and more what you do when you run. So I think a big myth is that you can overcome all these other problems you may have just by spending money on a $300 pair of super shoes. when that's not really the case for most of us.
So you're trying to say that these $300 or pounds worth of shoes are going to make no difference. I've just placed the order, Jeff. Why is it going to make
Well,
no
I
difference?
know. Well, I'm saying that I'm laughing because I ordered a pair. Um, well, but they do make a difference. I mean, there is science behind this, there is technology, but ultimately what it comes down to, well, I should also halt that and say that it has made a difference. Records have fallen, but some elite athletes won't run in them because they say they don't notice a particular difference themselves. It depends on your body mechanics. It depends on what you do. These things can affect you, but it's not the driving factor. That at the end of the day, I think it's still so important that you have good running form, that you've got a strong, balanced body, and that you're running correctly. And if you're not doing all that, then these 300-pound, $300 shoes are not going to save you, right? If you have bad running form and you put on fantastic shoes, you are still going to get injured, right? So even though I enjoy the technology, I enjoy all that stuff, keep your eye on the most important things. To be healthy, to be strong, to improve, it's not going to be the technology. It's going to be getting out there and training and making sure you're doing it in the smart, most effective way.
I suppose it's the same with most sports as well, because technology is going to be different 10 years from now than it is today. But a lot of people are now focusing on working on improving as an athlete or as a person or as a physical being. They're not just doing the sport, they are improving themselves in all areas. And then when they go and play the sport or they go and do the activity, they're better off because of that. They're not just getting better at the activity, they're getting better at everything.
That's right. That's true. As a personal trainer, I'm asked sometimes by my clients if it makes sense, if they're looking to put on muscle mass, to start taking creatine supplements. So I don't know if you know what creatine is. It's a substance that's produced naturally in your body, linked with muscle growth. You can take it as an additional supplement. Research shows that that can lead to, muscle growth. It's not an anabolic steroid. It's actually thought of better as like a form of fuel to help power good workouts. And that's all fine and good. But for a lot of my clients, I say, why don't we focus first on doing good workouts and see how far we can take that before you go on to the next step, right? Let's try and maximize our potential first by just doing things correctly and to the extent that we can before we dive into all these deep tech things. And to me, that approach actually should be comforting rather than discouraging. For all the people who now might be discouraged listening because they thought those super shoes can really make a difference in their lives, it should actually make you feel better that you don't have to spend 300 euro on a pair of shoes to become a runner. You don't need to do that. You also don't need to train yourself till you feel like you're about to collapse. That's another myth, that you really have to push yourself all the time to the edge. That's exactly the wrong way to do it. It's really about consistency and making smart choices. And to me, as someone who is not naturally skilled as a gifted athlete, that's so encouraging because it just means that if I stick with my program and I get out there and I do the work, then I can do these great things. Not because I'm an incredible athlete, not because I'm naturally gifted at anything, which I'm not, but because I will get out there and do it. And on marathon day, when I cross that finish line and I'm rewarded for all that hard work, it just makes me feel wonderful, that I was able to do that because of that that dedication, that stubbornness, perhaps that anyone can access. And you don't need a lot of money. You don't need fancy stuff to be able to do that. So it should be encouraging rather than discouraging. But having said that, sure, I'm not against all the technology, but just keep your eye on what's the most important thing that you need to do to lead to success.
It makes me think that we need to almost speak about being patient and trusting the process because I'm trying to work out why people resort to the expensive shoes or resort to the expensive supplements. I'm guessing it's an attempt to speed up the process. Maybe they're not happy with their results, or they've got a
Yeah,
goal and they've shortened the time scale and realized that it's not doable. And it's almost like this
right.
weird seesaw of what goals am I setting, trying to push myself. But then if they don't think they're making progress quick enough, then they resort to other things.
Yes, you're so right. You just said something there that I love, and I would urge all of your listeners to write it, on a slip of paper, put it on the refrigerator, write it on the bathroom mirror. I think that's such an important phrase. Trust in the process. I develop mantras as I train, and I encourage all my athletes to do that as well. Just little phrases that could help you stay motivated, keep you on target, boost you up when you're training, and especially in training, especially on race day, having that as a mantra is fantastic. Trust in the process that if you know that you're in a good program, the program will get you where you want to go. Trust that it will get you there. And when you've gotten to the end of the program, and now if you're training for an event, right? If you're running a marathon, for example, and you've done all the work, trust in the process that you've completed, that you'll be fine on race day. You've done all the work. People panic. I've found that so many people in our running community, and I'll put myself into this, are very insecure, right? We panic, that we have three bad workouts in a row and we're devastated. It's, oh my God, I suck. I'm the worst ever. Maybe we had a personal best in a race, but that was a month ago, and I'm not that guy anymore. I'm a terrible runner. I read an article once, I think it was by great writer Scott Douglas, runner and writer, about how, I might be wrong about who it is, but about how he visited this high altitude training camp in Africa with all these elite African runners. And they have such a different culture there. So he observed that they could have a bad workout and they're not worried about it. That's fine. They don't stress. They can have another bad workout. They don't panic. That's okay. They'll check to see what they can do to improve, but they're not, in panic mode yet. They can even have a third bad workout and they're not ready to abandon the program. And they don't define themselves by those workouts. And then they'll have that good day and they'll say, that's who I really am. But they know that this is part of the process. And they don't panic every time and change everything. So I would add to what you said that, not just to not panic and look for like that quick, easy way out, to suddenly fix everything, get faster, but also to stick with your program, give it a chance. So I've seen a lot of people who are willing to stick with the process, but they keep changing that process because there's all this information out there, including mine. I'm part of the noise, I understand, all these different ideas. And what we've learned is that there's just such genetic variety out there that different training programs could work for different people, right? That what might work for you, Michael, as an athlete to optimize your running may not be the same program under which I would thrive. So we all need to experiment and see what works best. And then we get older and everything changes all over again. But give it a chance. So I've seen people who keep changing their programs. Like I was on one program, I did that for like a month, and then I switched to this other training program. I'm getting ready to run the London Marathon, so I switched to this different program. And then I told him a month later, no, I ditched that one. I heard about this other one that I'm going to try. Then it's like making a soup and you keep changing the ingredient list as you go. Stick with your recipe, give it a shot, evaluate it, see if it works, see if it didn't, see what you want to do for the next training cycle. Trust in the process, but also choose a process and give it a fair shot. So important.
I wonder if that's one of the things that we could help people with as well. Like, how do you decide? How do you make those choices? Because I'd imagine people start
Yeah.
questioning things if the results don't come, and then it becomes a mental battle. Then, like, do you stick it out, or do you change it?
Yeah, that's so very true. You mentioned earlier about me choosing the marathon as my first race. It involves certain self-awareness. It really helps go into this to be very honest with yourself. And I talk about this in Think Like a Runner, my book, that you want to sit down and ask yourself certain basic questions, right? To really understand under what you thrive and not just think about what you feel would be best, but what you know will work best for you. If you are not the kind of guy who likes to run with a group, right? And you don't like to run a set hour, you like to fit into your schedule when you can, don't sign up for a running program. But if you're the kind of person who knows that you're not really self-motivated, no shame in this, right? That you do better running with a group. Most athletes do. Elites run as groups because they thrive as a group. Then you need that. You need to be with the group. If you find that, you're not a morning person, or you know reasonably that you have a lot of work commitments, you've got family commitments, you're just not going to be able to realistically do this every day. You've got injury history, that you have a tendency to have knee problems or hip problems. You're going to have to work on that. That you have to figure out what kind of program realistically can be best for you, and then give it a fair shot. Now, this is where talking with an expert can really help, talking with a good coach. And you could find good coaches from your local running store, from running clubs. You can get recommendations on people, but someone who could listen to you, take all the data that you provide, and talk about your goals, and have that expert tell you, this is a program I think you could thrive under, and then see how that develops. But really being honest with yourself about what will work for you and what would not work for you, what your goals are, and whether those are realistic goals, challenging but doable. Keeping all that in mind, you can start setting your path. But then give it a shot. trust in that process and don't panic just because you have a bad day. Be like the Africans, right? Don't worry about that one bad day. Worry about the bigger picture.
I wonder if there are any other challenges that people might face while they're on their running journey, whether at the start or they're on their 10th marathon, that sort of thing. What are some of the big challenges that runners would face, and what could we do about
Yeah.
those?
Yeah, well, staying motivated is a big one. Let's face it, running is a repetitive movement by definition, right? Boy, it can get boring. I have to dispel that myth. One of my personal myths is that everybody thinks I love this all the time, every run. And oh Lord, that's not true. It can be true for anyone. There are miserable days out there. I'm sure like all the elites, Eliud Kipchoge, maybe the greatest marathon of all time. I'm sure the days is like, oh God, this is awful. I hate this stuff. Finding ways to freshen up. I don't want to get myself in trouble with my wife, but I'll say that this is a little bit like a marriage, right? I know there are days I could see in her eyes, she looks at me and she's kind of had it with me. I know she loves me, but she just needs some space for me. I get that. Well, we're going to be going on vacation soon. We're going to Europe, and you need to spice it up. So you have a relationship with your body and with your sport. Find ways to have fun with it. I try and vary my routes all the time. Even something as simple as if you're doing a loop, this is amazing. Do it the other way around. Go in reverse, and it's a whole different world. You see things differently. Here in DC, I'm very lucky. We've got trail runs through the woods. I could run along the Potomac River. I could run through the city. I could run through these really interesting neighborhoods. I could run on the flat. I could run on hills. So I've got lots of options, and I try and mix it up to keep it fresh. So your relationship with running is like any relationship in your life. Find ways to keep it motivated. And sometimes that means taking a little break from it, especially if you've built up to a big event. Like after marathon, I was talking to a friend of mine who just ran the Grandma's Marathon here in Minnesota, out in the middle of the country when it was scorching hot. He just did that a week ago, and he needs a break. I said, take a break. Don't run for a month. That's fine. It'll be there when you're ready. Running is like your best friend. It will always take your call. It will always be ready to play with you. So staying motivated is one like the really, really big hurdles that people have to overcome.
Do you find that it's purely like a goal setting thing, or do you think that people have to work out why they're going to go out there and do another run for another 2 hours or so? It seems like we
Wow.
need to come up with a solution for this.
Yeah, that's a great comment. That's really interesting because it has layers and layers to it, right? So part of that depends on who you are and what you find you respond to. And that's about that self-awareness that you talked about earlier. Personally, I am very goal-oriented. I realize that as a person, almost annoyingly so. I can see that I have my little daily goals. Actually, this it sounds crazy. I'm a voracious reader. I have reading goals. How many books I want to read a month and a year, and I track all that. I write it down. I know it's crazy sounding, but I thrive on having goals. I remember there was an ad campaign by a shoe company years and years ago. They get enough publicity. I don't need to name them. But their tagline was, "There is no finish line." And I would find that devastating. That was awful. That was the least motivating thing you could possibly say to me. I need lots of finish lines. I need lots of goals. I respond well to that, hourly, daily, weekly. For me to get motivated to throw myself against that goal, to get that sense of accomplishment by achieving that goal, and that renewed desire to keep getting that feeling of accomplishment. That's why I love the finish line in a race. When you cross the finish line, you know exactly what you've achieved, you know exactly what it took to get you there, and you can revel in the fact that you achieved your goal. Or if you didn't, try and figure out what it is that, could put you on the track to completing that goal. Other people, they wouldn't react to that. I had a friend of mine, this is so interesting to me, so funny. She was training for a marathon. And usually, personally as a coach, I recommend if you're going to do the marathon, right, 42 kilometers, 26.2 miles, in training, I would not build you up to run that actual distance because it's just too much pounding on your body. If you're training for a 10-kilometer race, a 5-kilometer race, you'll be expected to do long runs, not racing, but easy, that exceed that distance to what we call build your engine, to build that big cardio base. But with marathoning, too much pounding on your body, you don't go that far. Maybe like an 18-miler, 20-miler, 23 miles tops to build up to the race. Okay, so there's one woman who was training on her own, not one of my clients, but a good friend. And one day, as she's building towards this marathon she had signed up for, she ran the full 26.2 miles in training, right, to do that. And she had a good experience, really enjoyed it. It was great. And I thought, that's wonderful. You are so prepared for the race now. And she decided not to run the marathon. And I was shocked. I was apoplectic. What are you talking about? You just did all this work, right? And now you're not going to like actually do the race? It's like ordering this wonderful dessert, maybe taking a tiny little bit, and then that's all. That's it. I'm done. I'm like, that's crazy. You did all the work, do the race. She's like, well, I just signed up because I want to see if I could do it. And now I just ran 26.2. I did it. I got everything I wanted from it. Oh, yeah, 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 but the race. Oh, the people cheering, the medal. Don't you want the medal? I don't care about the medal, she said. I just want to see that I could do it. And I did it. Obviously, crossing the finish line for her was not as motivational. And she did absolutely the right thing for her, that she had a goal. She knew what would provide motivation, and she got everything out of it she needed to. That's her. I would have felt the loss by not enjoying the racing experience after that. So understanding what motivates you, what will keep you on track, whether it's having these goals, whether it's just continuity, whether it's community. Some people, they do it just for the fun. My son, 19-year-old son, not really big into sports, but he gets out there just to be around his friends. So he'll go play a game of football or basketball. And, not that he cares about the sport or the score, but just because he enjoys just being out there with his friends. That could be what gets you going. But having that self-awareness to know what it is that really motivates you and not getting confused. If you're the kind of person who gets overly stressed by racing and you tend to get hurt in your races and you don't really enjoy it, don't do it. There's so many runners who think that once they begin running, they absolutely positively have to do a marathon at some point. It's almost like it's expected of you. Oh, you're a runner? I'm sure you do marathons, right? You don't have to. You define what it is that makes you successful and happy and healthy, and then do that. Sounds simple, but sometimes it requires a lot of self-awareness and a lot of discipline to do what you should and don't do what you shouldn't.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think everyone should be able to at least do the running how they would like to do it.
Yeah,
I
I'll tell you
wouldn't.
a little story. I know that it's funny. It's said of me that never say just one word when 10 words could do, because I it always reminds me of more stories. But I'll say this one really quickly because I love this. I've got a good friend of mine, Michelle. She's an elite athlete, elite triathlete, and I used to run with her these track workouts at 5:30 in the morning with a group. And we were coming towards the fall season and gearing up for winter. We're getting down towards like December. It's going to be January, February. Those awful mornings. And I remember in the past we'd been with this group on the track in the dark before dawn in the snow. I remember running out there with snow coming down on the track and just being miserable. And so, we're now in the fall, and I turned to her at one point, and Michelle, you getting ready for the winter track workouts? And she said, I decided not to do it. I said, what? She said, yeah, I don't like it. I'm not gonna do it. I don't want to. And I was shocked. And I couldn't believe it. It's if you all have seen The Wizard of Oz, the movie, of course, it's all black and white, and then Dorothy steps out the door in the land of Oz from her house that's landed, and everything's in color. It felt like that. It's like all of a sudden the door's open. I'm like, wait, not do it because you don't like it and you don't want to. Huh. It took me a while to wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
She just has a healthy choice. She's an elite athlete, and she's like, this is not productive for me. I don't want to do it. Come the spring, I will gear up again, and I will get out there. I'll do all the hard work. I'm not going to do what I don't like to do that I don't think is positive for me. It was liberating, right? So with runners, we have a difficult time thinking that, we need to do what we may not feel like doing, but which will be good for us, versus don't do the things that don't bring you joy, that don't put you in a better place. And sometimes it's really hard to tell which group that is, but thank you, Michelle, for teaching me we don't have to do the things that we don't like to do, we don't want to do, and aren't good for us. That was so important.
That sounds like step one of trying to make running fun, but I wonder, are there any other ways that runners like yourself or people listening can make running fun? Because you mentioned how boring it can be, so let's try
Yeah.
and fix that.
Community I mentioned earlier is so important. I catch up with my friends. A lot of people, they use food and drink as a way. Oh, let's go to the pub. We'll catch up and talk, which is fine. No problem with that. I do that. Catch up with people on the run. Hey, haven't seen you in a long time. Let's do like an easy short, 5 kilometer run and just talk. Let's find out what's going on with your family. And what's great about that, I'll say as a coach, we use something called a talk test, where if you're supposed to be on an easy run, you should not be pushing your anaerobic threshold, which means if you're out of breath and you can't talk, you're going too fast for that workout. So, if you're having a casual conversational run with someone, that will force you to stay in that proper zone. So it's a good thing to do. So community, go with groups. We are social beings. We want to be together. Make that part of it. I also sneak in running as part of my commuting and running errands. So you can do that instead of like maybe driving somewhere to do something, going to work or dropping off a package at the post office. Make that your run, right? I've got some errands I got to run later. And incidentally, free yourself from the idea that you have to do all your running all at once because the research has shown that it is cumulative. So if you run a kilometer in the morning and then 2 kilometers in the afternoon and a kilometer in the evening, you run 4 kilometers, you'll get all the benefit from that, as if you did it all at once. In fact, it may be better for you because if you break it up, maybe each one can be higher quality. So, break it up. It won't be as daunting. Just a quick little short run to the post office. I'll drop off the package, I'll run home. I'm going to run into work today. My wife teaches art at a local elementary school. And when the weather's nice, she runs to work. That's her workout. And that saves her time because even though it's slower than driving, overall, it's quicker than doing driving and a workout later. And it just puts you in such a good mood. Enjoy the weather. Sometimes, even though I don't like running in the rain, boy, it's fun being out there in like a heavy rainstorm. You feel like a little kid, splash in the puddles. Enjoy all that. Running, I talk about this, and think like a runner to enjoy certain things. Certain things we should all do. We should all go at some point for a sunrise run, to see the sunrise or a sunset run, right? To do those. Do a goofy, weird race. There's a race I'm trying to talk a friend of mine into. Listen to this. It's called the Krispy Kreme Challenge. Do you have Krispy Kreme donuts in the UK?
I don't think we do, no, although I might be wrong. I don't eat donuts, so I couldn't tell you.
I know. Well, I shouldn't, but it's okay. It's okay to, I tell people it's not what you do occasionally that defines you. It's what you do most of the time. So if you occasionally have a donut, it's not the end of the world. So there's actually a fundraising race in North Carolina. Krispy Kreme is a brand of donut here. It's, full of fat, sugar, and all those awful things that make life worth living. And so it started out with a couple athletes who decided to raise money for like I think it's a children's program. And they would run to a local Krispy Kreme, which is like 5K away from them, eat some donuts, and run back. And that was the challenge. And it's become this huge thing, and now it's a big race. So the challenge is, it's crazy, to run 5 kilometers, eat a dozen donuts, and then run back. And it's all for charity. It sounds awful, it sounds ridiculous, and it sounds fun. Pick a fun race. They have all these weird, goofy races. Run in a costume. Do something to make it fun. We don't have to be so serious all the time. You'll have your serious runs and your serious training and your serious races, but sometimes just run. There's the great running writer George Sheehan wrote Running and Being. He used to write for Runner's World. Unfortunately, passed away some years ago. But he liked to say, run like a child. And I think that's wonderful advice, that sometimes we just have to enjoy running. You never see a little kid running who seems unhappy. They all love to run. So do that sometimes. Put away your watch. Don't even worry how far you go. Just have fun with it.
Have you ever seen someone doing a run outside of an event that's wearing a costume?
That would be fun though, right? I mean, I think you're right, but imagine if you're walking down the street, you're going to work or you're on your own run, and I've got this little costume I wore in a race. It's not much of a costume. I try and be realistic. I don't want to wear a big, heavy costume if it's going to be a hard race. It'd just be miserable. But I just have a pair of wings that I wear on my shoulders, just wings. I think it really helps me fly. And people love it when I'm running, when I'm racing. I've never worn it just on a run down the street, but I could almost guarantee that I get a lot of cheers if I did that. Imagine if you saw someone running down the street in a costume. It's hard not to smile, even thinking about it. Bring joy to other people's lives by doing that.
I was just thinking that people would do it to make other people feel happy. Imagine that'd be quite the hobby.
Yeah, these little things. I've realized it's a little thing I'm working on here. Especially here in the US, I think all around the world, there is, unfortunately, tragically, a lot of hate. We seem very angry as a world, especially here in the United States. And I'm not quite sure why. In some ways, life is always hard, and there's always, war and death and famine. But in a lot of ways, we're so lucky in this time, even with all the terrible, awful things going on and the people really suffering in the world. I don't want to minimize that, this is not clearly the worst of times, that so many of us now are so lucky, to be able to have good lives. Why are we so angry? Why do people hate each other? Why are they so mad all the time? And you walk down the street and you see people scowling. And I think, it doesn't take much to turn them around. What I've discovered is that if you compliment someone on something they're wearing, it changes everything. It sounds ridiculous. But, running down the street, I'll just call it, hey, like your shirt. I get a big smile and a wave. And that's all it took. All it took. A woman in a dress, and I'm always careful, approaching women because I don't want to seem threatening or inappropriate. So I always, keep my distance as I'm going by. I love your dress. I just said that to someone yesterday, and her face lit up. Thank you. And kept on my way, minding my own business. But give someone a compliment. I think it's a great idea just randomly compliment someone. Another runner, you look great. Keep going, buddy. You'll see how instantly it changes the whole dynamic with you and them in the world. So let's be a force for a little bit of good. Maybe it won't change the world, but who knows? Maybe it will.
That's a great way of looking at it, Jeff. And I wonder, you've had a lot of experience with running and keeping active. And I wonder, do you have any lessons that you could impart on my listeners? I think of top lessons that you've learned from your time running and keeping active.
Wow. Yep. So, are you looking for like the overall philosophical ones, or you want like the detailed coaching line?
Ooh, let's go
I
both.
know. Trick, which one?
Let's try one or two of each.
Okay, so coaching. So I teach a running class actually here at George Washington University here in DC. And there's a lot to teach. I obviously enjoy inhabiting my own brain with this stuff, right? I mean, maybe to a fault. I love talking about it. Um, trying to figure out why this is meaningful to me, why I love it, how it matters to me. But physiologically, there's a lot going on, and the more you understand about the way our bodies move and what works and what doesn't, what we need to do to run correctly as a runner, the better runner you'll be. It's interesting because no one teaches you how to run, right? If you want to become a tennis player, you'll take tennis lessons. But nobody like starts out thinking, oh, I should take running lessons. But we should. We should go to a running coach. We should get a gait analysis and learn all these things about how to run. But I tell my class, the BM class, perhaps the most important thing I can tell you is so simple, and I'll tell you now. That you should always keep in mind and just work on that is to run quietly, right? Have a light foot straight. So there are people when they run, they sound like this, right? And they should really sound like that. It should be very light, very light. When you have higher ground impact, right, you have a higher risk of injury. So all you have to do is figure out how to run a little bit lighter and reduce your risk of injury and you'll feel better. There's a lot of little technical things that are involved in that. But the very easiest thing to remember is if you hear your foot strike slapping, do what you can to try and quiet that down. I don't want to tell you what to do that. You'll discover that on your own and you'll adopt it better if you figure that out. But you can control that. There are things in life you can't control. But the loudness that you hear when you run is one of those things actually you can control. And especially when you're tired, keep listening to this, not just in the beginning when you start, but later on in your run. Because as we fatigue, we get sloppier and then you'll start slapping. So, when I'm running and I start hearing my foot strike, I start hearing that loud slap, I tell myself, Jeff, pull it together, knock it off, run correctly and quiet that down. So that'd be one of the number one things I tell people. And for philosophically, I remember once seeing a sign in a race, and I love this. It said that someday you will not be able to do this anymore. Today is not that day. And I think a lot about that. It's so easy to take all this for granted and focus only on our goals. When my son graduated, I told him I may not have a lot of great advice for you, but I'm going to tell you this for what it's worth. One of my big life lessons. Okay, I think the key for me to success in life, to being happy, to enjoying it, to being successful, is to find a balance between ambition and satisfaction. Right? That ambition drives us to improve and to strive and to achieve, right? But if all you have is ambition, then you'll never be happy because you're always pushing towards that next goal, right? And you're never just happy with what you've got. On the other hand, if you just have satisfaction and you're always happy with what you've done, but you don't have any ambition, then you're complacent. Then you're just resting on your laurels and you really don't care about anything in the future. You're just, whatever happens, happens is fine. And I think really it'd be a fault to have only all of one or all of the other. So I think the most important thing in our lives to achieve that kind of happiness, not just in our running, but in our lives overall, is that balance between ambition and satisfaction. I'll tell you how it plays out in running. I had a good friend of mine. There's a great local 10K, the largest 10 miler, rather, the largest 10 miler in the country, probably one of the most important ones in the world, the Cherry Blossom 10 miler. It's in April here in DC. It's considered a tune-up before the Boston Marathon, so you've got a lot of great elite athletes who come in for it. And I had a friend of mine who'd run it 15 years in a row. So 15 years she'd run the Cherry Blossom 10 miler. And she's very competitive. She pushes herself hard. She often, will place in her age group, win trophies and all that. And she had to have foot surgery one year. And she came back and she was still able to run in the Cherry Blossom 10 miler. And I was so impressed because I thought she would not be able to run at all. So the fact that she ran, the fact that she ran 10 miles, I was so proud of her, And then she told me, though, that she was so very disappointed because she didn't post the same time that she did last year, the year before. And I thought that is such an awful way of looking at it. She should have been so elated just to have been out there, to enjoy it. Because like that sign said, someday she won't be able to do this anymore. And that day she still did. But instead of really enjoying that, she was just disappointed she didn't achieve what she was hoping to achieve from the year before. It's snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. So figure out how to maintain joy. Don't take all this running for granted because it's inevitable that someday we won't be able to do this anymore. Again, I could talk on and on about this. There's a route that I like to take my students on here in DC. We have an avenue, Massachusetts Avenue, that's called Embassy Row because it's where most of the foreign embassies are placed. A beautiful boulevard heading mostly uphill. And on that boulevard, there's also green space. There's a park there. And in one of the parks, there's a small sitting area that's dedicated to the Lebanese poet Khalil Gibran. If your listeners know, he's had that famous poem, "A loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and thou." And so in this little park, there are all these engravings in this sitting area in the stone of some of his poetry. So I like to take my students up there, and we go over to this little park, this little sitting area. There's a little bas-relief portrait of him, and we look at the poetry, and I point out one of the bits of poetry. And I want to share that with you now because I think it's so central to what we're talking about. The poem that he writes there, the snippet of it reads, "Don't you know that spirits in the ether envy man his pain? Spirits in the ether envy man his pain." And then I ask my students, what do you think that means? And they give me this blank look because this is a running class. This isn't a poetry class. What am I doing? It's not fair. But to me as a runner, that goes to the heart of this, that when I've been injured, right, and not able to run at all, boy, do I miss even the worst of my most miserable low energy runs, right? When I cannot do this at all, I wish I could be out there even on the worst weather days. If it was cold or rainy, I was sluggish and slow. At least I would be out there. I'm jealous of everyone who's out there pushing their bodies, and just living life, right? So spirit in the ether feels neither joy nor sorrow nor pain, feels nothing, right? And it's envious of those emotions, of feeling something, even pain. That's why the spirits would envy us, even our pain. So I think about that when I'm running on a day that's hard. I think this is so much better than not being able to do this at all. And if someday, inevitably, I won't be able to do this, then why am I unhappy now? Because even on a bad day, even on a day maybe I had to drop out of a race or cut a run short, or I'm slower or sluggish, I'm still here and alive and moving and doing this thing. Remember that. It will change your running life, I think.
Well, that is a fantastic way to finish, Jeff. Thanks so much for that. I will remember it for a while now. And for those that would like to learn more about you, running, possibly get in touch, how can they do that? So it's your chance to share websites and social media, that sort of thing.
Right. I'm actually not on social media. I'm taking a break just like from running. You can contact me at my email. I love hearing from my readers and I love hearing all their stories. Jeffrey.horowitz@msn.com. My books, published by Velo Press. You can find that on Amazon. You can contact me through the publisher. I have 5 books out. You are correct, and the 6th one is coming out this October. My most recent one is Think Like a Runner, about the whole running journey from starting your running to becoming better running to racing, dealing with injuries and aging as a runner. Think Like a Runner. And this fall, is the runner's bucket list. So setting all those goals, having all those goals to shoot for, from the greatest races around the world to the ways we should train and the things we should try. So you could look for those books online and contact me through Velo Press, my publisher, or directly online. Love to hear from everyone, and I hope you all enjoying your lives and sharing your stories as well.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Jeff, it's been fantastic. Thanks so much, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.